Hi, white people. My name is Anada Okonkwo, and I am your new anti-racism life coach, as well as the host of this show, which is called Solutions to Whiteness. Now, before we get started, I just want to give you a warning that I'm going to talk about some things, and we're going to explore some topics that are very much ingrained with how you identify yourself. We're going to talk about some topics that may contradict your sense of what you hold as valuable or values. We are going to talk about some topics that might quite frankly piss you off. And if it pisses you off, that's fine. I would much rather we be honest than hide under the guise of being politically correct. Because when you're politically correct, you're not being truthful. You're just being polite for the sake of not pissing someone off, and then you're not actually getting to the root of the issue. Okay, I didn't want to have to talk about this. I like to steer away from socio-political topics as much as I can these days on my platform because it just ruffles so many feathers. But this is something that I felt was very timely and just needs to be said. First thing I want to talk about is after the sensationalism of two unarmed black men, after this whole sensationalism dies down, we are still going to be left with a system of injustice and racism that's still going to be alive and well. And it's going to be a system that you benefit from because privilege is invisible to those that enjoy that privilege. They're only aware of that privilege when it is held up in comparison to someone who doesn't enjoy the basic privileges of wearing their hair in its natural form in corporate America, or going to the gas station, or someone who happens to take a walk in a neighborhood that's not their own, or someone who's habitually stopped by the police. These are examples of privilege and a life that you don't experience firsthand. I also want to talk about, let's just kind of get into the matter of it, to one of the things I wanted to talk about, and I just wanted to talk about police and the whole notion of good cop, bad cop. I hear a lot of people talk about, I'm sure you have people who serve in law enforcement, and your husband or son or brother or whatever, they're a good cop and a bad cop. I want to talk about the fact that law enforcement is a paramilitary hierarchy. It's structured in such a way to where we, the people of the community, pays their salaries, but we have actually absolutely no direct hand in how they're disciplined, and we can't even investigate them. They investigate themselves. The primary purpose of law enforcement is to protect property and to protect the investments and interests of the people who own those particular properties. That is why when there is rioting or some type of social unrest or protesting becomes a bit too animated, the police are there to protect property and to restore order for the sake of protecting that property. The other reason why the police exists is to also protect the socioeconomic structure, which means that's where profiling comes in. They make sure that someone who's not supposed to be in that particular area, or someone who's not a part of a certain demographic, They make sure that that person doesn't meander where they're not supposed to be. That is why when myself or black men or people of color, when we cross a invisible color line, that's why our chances of being profiled or stopped by cops, that is why it increases astronomically. I'm not saying that police officers don't do anything besides this. There are, numerous cases in which they've acted as heroes and things of that nature. But the primary function of law enforcement is to protect property and to observe and to keep socioeconomic and demographic structure. So to preserve those two things, that's the primary function, and also to write citations, so to bring in money to the sheriff's department or wherever they work. That's the primary functionality of law enforcement. The narrative of protecting and serving, I feel like that is very much a whitewashed narrative that is slapped on the police to give them this badge of honor. And of course, if you're a part of a demographic of people who is privileged, of course they're protecting and serving you. They're protecting and serving the structure and hierarchy that you benefit from. The privilege of being white is that you don't have to think about color at all. You can kind of turn it off. As a black person, you don't get that privilege. I can't wake up one day and decide that I don't want to consider my race for the rest of my life, because this country will not allow that to be so. Since we're on the topic of race, white people, please stop teaching your kids to be colorblind. Stop teaching them the half-assed speech of Martin Luther King Jr. that race doesn't matter. Because when you teach your children not to acknowledge race, what you're doing is you're also exacerbating a fear in them. I feel like white people fear what they don't understand. And when you employ colorblindness as a solution to what you don't understand, then it exacerbates that fear. And that fear is later seen in incidences where people are kneed in the neck, choked to death, beaten for selling cigarettes. There is an underlying narrative or fear that white people seem to have where people of color somehow are different than they themselves, that we don't shit like they shit, we don't breathe like they breathe somehow. Somehow our very existence is predatory, and that's a problem. So please teach your kids to acknowledge race, acknowledge ethnicity. When you acknowledge ethnicity, then you acknowledge the culture that the person comes from. When you know the person's culture, then you understand that person better. And when you understand that person better, you become comfortable around that person or around this demographic of people. And you don't start imposing your own standards of normalcy on them and acting hostile when they don't abide by your standards of normalcy, because you're imposing color blindness on people. So that's the root of the discussion. But also, white people have to become more self-aware. Not more self-aware, self-aware. I'm having to do this video because white people can't own their lack of self-awareness, can't own their fears, can't own their ignorance, and it's being projected on minorities, and we're pissed the fuck off about it, and we're afraid for our lives, and we're made to bear the brunt of the lack of white people's lack of accountability. You know what I'm saying? And that's not right. So white people need to educate other white people. if you are a white person and you sincerely want to put a dent in racism, you have to exercise self-awareness beyond this incident of sensationalism that's going on. White people need to meet regularly where it's only white people, where they can openly talk about their own fears. I don't know if you fear that giving minorities the same privileges or acknowledging our humanity the same way. I don't know if you subconsciously fear that that's going to take away from what you have. You may fear equity because you feel like, oh, I didn't do that, like my ancestors did that. But you are still propagating that toxicity from your ancestors in today's society, because we are in a system, a racial system that is structured to uphold the toxicity that your ancestors who created this system held, and they built it intricately right into the system that we're living in today in the year 2020. So white people, get together and talk amongst other white people. People of color don't need to be there, because if a person of color is there, then you're going to have the feeling that you need to be politically correct, and then you're not going to get to the root of self-awareness, the root of fears, the root of lack. Because fear actually comes from, at the very root of it, it comes from a feeling of lack. You know, you feel that this system, as though it's oppressive, although you're privileged, you benefit from it, you feel that you shouldn't challenge it, right? Because it'll take away from what you have. If you feel that people of color being on even keel with you is a threat to you, that is a problem in your belief system. You are deeply fearful. You are deeply fearful, or you're dealing with some type of ignorance, or a combination of that. A curriculum needs to be structured by white people, taught to white people, that advocates for self-awareness, where y'all can get for real with each other. And that curriculum needs to be taught on a military level. It needs to be taught on a law enforcement level. It needs to be taught on a governmental level. That, I feel, is what needs to happen. And it needs to happen consistently. Not just, when something like this happens. It needs to be taught consistently. Self-awareness. And white people have their own collective consciousness and collective unconsciousness that they don't have to discuss, because they don't have to think about their race, right? Unless it's in the face of other people, and it makes them uncomfortable to talk about it. But self-awareness is an uncomfortable journey, but it is a journey that is rewarding. And I promise you, white people, once you work through those fears and release them, you will release a lot of toxicity that you didn't know you had. And that will greatly contribute to putting a dent in racism. I'm Anada Okonkwo. I am relieved to talk about these things, and it's been great hosting this segment with you, Solutions to Whiteness. Have a blessed evening, and please share this. Share it. And also, don't be afraid to contradict me if you don't agree with certain things that I'm saying. Peace, all love.